Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Change Leaders monthly webinar series about how to grow enrollment and create financially sustainable higher education institutions. My name is Dr. Drumm McNaughton, and I'm the CEO of the Change Leader. Today we're going to talk about positioning, which is one of the first and critical steps in our holistic approach to growing enrollments. Positioning institutions is no longer a luxury. If it's done right, branding is an effective tool to deal with a very competitive marketplace that we have in higher ed. And today we're going to talk about how you can stand out in a sea of similar education options. Research tells us that there's only 3 ubiquitous ways that institutions can improve regardless of where they are in their life cycle. Planning with good implementation, business process improvement if focused on the customer, and building leadership and management capacity. Today we're going to talk about this first portion here, positioning. A lot of webinars will give you pie in the sky theory. Not today and not us. Today we're going to give you practical tools that will help you implement the things that we talked about, such as how to position your institution so that you could become known as the place to go for whatever program it is, or how to use that positioning to drive your branding, increase your enrollments, and build a shared vision that eliminates or mitigates resistance to change for your implementation. We've got a couple of housekeeping notes. First off, we're recording this presentation so that if you're not able to hear the whole thing or you have to leave early, which we don't recommend because we've got some special free gifts for those of you who stay on, you'll be able to see it. Second, if you have questions as we're going along, please type them in the questions box down at the bottom of your the toolbar for GoToWebinar. If it's appropriate, we'll interrupt, but if it isn't, then we'll just ask you to hold the questions till the end. And lastly, the structure for this is we're going to talk about the theory and the model. We're going to introduce that at the beginning, and then we're going to show some great examples of how the theory gets applied. So today we're very fortunate to have a real good friend of mine on the phone. She's a branding and marketing expert. Her name is Vickie Sullivan. She's helped thousands of brilliant, talented people and organizations outsmart their competition since 1987. And trust me, she looks actually younger than her picture is. She's done some incredible work. She's been a TEDster since 2013 and helps lend her expertise as a mentor to support TED programs for TED Fellows at the 2014 and 15. She's also earned an appointment to the Women's Leadership Board for the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, where she served as the communications chair on the executive committee and a former member of the mentoring committee. She's also given 3 presentations at Harvard, which obviously she is no slouch. So Vickie, welcome. Glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, Drumm. Now, how did you know that flattery will get you anywhere with me?
Well, it's all about branding, isn't it?
I'm telling you, it is, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's get started, shall we?
Absolutely.
So, you know, education has got some challenges going on, as we all know. Enrollments are down. They're trending down. Students enroll at other institutions which cost more or not as good as your own institution. Your revenues aren't meeting current expenses. Institutions are borrowing from their endowments, or they don't have an endowment. They don't have an institutional strategic plan, or it's not followed or updated. Or they don't have an academic strategic plan, or it's not in sync with the overall strategic plan, or there's no shared vision or ownership of the institution's direction. These are all symptoms of an institution not being positioned properly, and any one of these can cost your institution significant dollars. I think T.J. Rogers, from his book, No Excuses Management, talked about it best. He says, most companies don't fail for a lack of talent. They fail for a lack of vision and execution. That execution, the routine blocking and tackling that great organizations consistently do well and strive to do better. This all starts with positioning and branding. Now, we did a study. The Change Leader does surveys from time to time, and we did a survey back at the beginning of the year of the top student issues in 2017. And you can see up on your screen here, this is from the board and the cabinet members of institutions. The top student issue they see is student debt, and then student attitudes on higher education. On a Likert scale, 1 to 5, 3.93 and 3.31 respectively was what came out. Now, what's even more revealing is taking a look at the top business issues. 4.0 for diversification of revenues and increasing reliance on tuition for revenues, affordability of education, and decreasing or stagnant revenues. These are major red flags, and positioning is one of the things that can help turn these around. This is very much in line with Inside Higher Ed's 2016 survey of the chief business officers, the CFO for higher ed institutions. They believe, 63% believe that the media reports for financial crisis in higher ed are accurate. Now they say 43% say that faculty members participate meaningfully, but 54% say that the faculties should play even more a role in understanding and making budget campus decisions. That's not happening, and it really needs to be better understood so that we can get away from these higher numbers. So now that you understand, here's the new number, here's the new normal. The number of traditional college-age students, 18 to 22, is decreasing. Students believe there's less value in higher ed. 75% of students are considered to be post-traditional. They're not full-time students on campus. They don't live within a mile, and they're working full-time. Here's the big problems. 68% of students choose their college based on the distance from home, within 30 miles, and 95% of all institutions look like each other. They teach the same subjects. They have the same degrees, the same programs. This is a real problem. Has education become a commodity? What can we do to mitigate it? So we're almost done with the theory stuff. Here is a holistic view of university management. And we're going to zero in primarily in this future environment here and your ideal future. And you can see down here positioning and rallying cry. This portion is very important, but this is the part we're going to focus on today. So your future environment really is telling us what will or may change in the future. Your strategic plan really looks at the next 5 to 10 years of where the organization is going, and it's wrapped up in your vision, mission, values, and your ideal future. It's your strategies here that will get you to your future, where you want to be. Here's the challenge. Most organizations don't look strongly enough at this future environment and then don't position themselves well enough to take advantage of market opportunities. We're going to talk a lot about that today, but that's the bottom line with most of this stuff is you've got to position yourself to take advantage of not only what's going on now, but the future of what's going to be happening. For example, the EC Council is an institution which does cybersecurity. And they looked back at 9/11 at that time frame saying, what are we going to do with the internet? And they've come out with a number of certifications that meet NSA specifications, et cetera. So this is a way that an organization took a look at what's going to be going on in the future and position themselves properly. So higher ed leaders, the successful ones, look at organizations holistically. They focus on the big picture, just like what we were talking about a minute ago. They focus on the big picture, and then they measure the outcomes. They also align the strategy, the organization structure, and the processes so that they all work together. And this is all part of the planning, the implementation, change being the primary job of the institutional leaders. And lastly, they attune their stakeholders. People support what they help create. And by creating a shared vision, this really helps a smooth implementation, and people take ownership of what's going on in an institution. So Vickie, here's a question. In taking a look at all of these type of things that institutions have to do, where does positioning fit into all this? What is the role of this context?
Well, I think this role of this context does two things. First, you make sure that there's no orphans. You know, nothing happens in a vacuum. So holistic thinking makes sure that the ripple effect does not negate the overall impact. Alignment makes sure that everyone is on board before you launch. It takes advantage of momentum, which is critical in any kind of branding effort. Momentum is everything. In branding, you never want to underestimate ownership. When you have ownership, you have momentum. When you have momentum, you have a flying start. It can cover up a multitude of obstacles.
You know, that makes so much sense. And from a change management perspective, positioning, it seems like it's just the foundation of this kind of relationship, this alignment and attunement.
Absolutely. What it does is the foundation and the relationship really creates and defines expectations, both internally and externally. And when people know what is expected of them, if you know what's going to happen next, there's comfort in that. There's relief in that, especially in volatile situations. So when you create a brand and you have a relationship, you're creating and defining expectations. And the driving force, that's the vehicle that really communicates your ideal future. So the output of the relationship and the driving force, that is the rallying cry shown in your model here, which is used both internally and externally.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about what positioning is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Positioning is, again, a series of decisions and messages that you say that you put out there to help create an emotional context and expectations. So as a result of emotional context and expectations, people create a perception about you. And that perception starts driving their experience of you. And that experience will differentiate you when students have a wide variety of options.
Okay. And in some ways, they call this the grand strategy. You know, it's how you differentiate yourself versus your competition. And it's the way to sustain that competitive advantage versus the competition over time. We're going to see some great examples of that. Carnegie Mellon is one that comes to mind. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
You know, and Drumm, I just want to echo that comment for a second. I think the biggest mistake everyone makes, you know, inside and outside of higher education, is we don't ask ourselves the question, as compared to what? Right? We get so caught up in creating our idealized future. We are so excited that we have discovered and refined our gifts. We stop there. And so what I suggest to a lot of folks, anyone that will listen, is that once you've identified that, that's just the beginning. Now what you got to do is go out there and look at other options, look around and think like a student and their influencers. So if you are a student or their parents or whoever's influencing them, what matters to them? How are they comparing all their options? And that will help you determine that grand strategy and competitive edge, because now it is in context of what students face.
It makes so much sense. So really what positioning is answering the question of what's that one thing that's unique, it's different, it's better about us, and it's in the eyes of the customer. I mean, I see so many entrepreneurs, and you know I've been consulting for a long time. I've seen so many entrepreneurs, hey, we've got the latest and greatest thing, and according to their own vision, that's exactly right, but they fail to put themselves in the face or in the position of their customer.
Absolutely. And you know what happens when you do that? When you do that, you see things from a wide-angle lens. You see all the other options that your buyer or your student has. And then from that place, you could say, where do I fit? How do I apply my strategic advantage in a way that I stand out in the sea of options? But you'll never get there until you see what else is going on around you.
Absolutely, and that's that holistic view that we talk about so much with the change leader is what's the big picture of what's going on and how can you adjust to make sure that you stand out in a large market of competitors. And that's what you excel at, is helping institutions do that.
Absolutely, because, you know, the sharpest knife can't carve its own handle. I think we all need a pair of fresh eyes to say, okay, here's what we're thinking. What are we missing? You know, because a lot of times with confirmation bias and whatever, we can miss stuff hiding in plain sight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is one model that we use with respect to competitive advantage and positioning. And this one is targeted toward customer service, but it gives five really good ways that an organization can distinguish itself. Now, this is apart from the programs that it will issue, but this is about brand and recognition and positioning. So you've got personal choice. This is a Nordstrom. You've got responsiveness. You know, how many folks will call you back within 3 hours of getting a phone call? Total cost. You know, low cost Walmart comes to mind with this. Caring service, you know, same sort of thing, or high quality, you know, Ferrari, things along these lines. So it's these things, you have to excel in at least one of these and then be responsive, competitive in the remaining. And your best will be responsive, or they'll excel in two or three of these. So,
and I think you're going to see these in the examples we have coming up. When we start talking about, you know, where the rubber meets the road, you will see some great examples of higher ed institutions who are doing it right. And we can take some pages off of their playbook and apply what they do in our own way.
Exactly. So, you know, in taking a look at where we are on the different factors, you know, competitive advantage and positioning, you know, how are you unique, different, and better than your competition? You know, where are you competitive versus your competition? And then where are you uncompetitive? Really, you're below the curve. And then you've got your positioning and differentiation. Who are your competitors? How do your programs match up? Are they the same? Are they different? So these are all, it seems to me, and Vickie, tell me if this makes sense, it seems to me that there are multiple levels to positioning, differentiation, and branding. How does that match up?
Absolutely. Branding is a big word that people bandy about, but it's really got a lot of nuance, and it has, quite frankly, a lot of moving parts. And the problem is if you mess up on just one or two of those moving parts, it can sink the ship, so to speak. So you have to be careful, because branding is more fragile than people think it is. Just a few mistakes, just a few degrees off market, and you can land in a completely different place than where you expected. And the problem, too, is that the marketplace, if you don't get some of this stuff right about the competitive versus your competition and uncompetitive versus your competition, just as an example, if you stray a little bit beyond that, just in the spirit of implementation, the market will not tell you that. Students and other influencers, other stakeholders, they won't tell you that. They will just ignore you. So what you get in reaction from the marketplace is radio silence. And that's deadly, because that's not enough information to know what's wrong. You'll just get an indication that something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. And, I've seen this. I know one institution, it was a colleague of mine called them up. They offer masters and PhDs. And you can't get anybody on the phone, even in enrollment services. They'll call you back, they won't call you back, and the institution wonders why they're not enrolling more students. And it's a top degree program, at least it used to be, but they're struggling financially. It's like, come on, folks, wake up. You've got to at least be responsive to who your customer is.
Yep, and I call that tripping on pebbles. The best brand in the world can be totally derailed over a pebble like that.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't take much. Again, going back to the fragility of branding. It's just so much. And we've seen this in the news, where an airline, had a misstep. Their brand is going to take a huge hit just from this one incident.
Yeah. So it sounds like the brand is the reputation. And then the positioning starts off is, what are you good at? Where do you excel? Where are you competitive? Where are you not competitive? And then how do you differentiate yourself? And then you brand that differentiation and the position. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Here's my approach, Drumm. When I work with clients, whether it's thought leaders, large organizations, wherever, we combine two things. First off, we get clear on the competitive advantage, all right? And then we get clear on, based upon those assets, where's the best place to play? What is the territory? How do we deploy our differentiation? What are our messages that best implement that differentiation? See, it's not enough just to say, newsflash, we're different. It's not enough to say, oh, here's how we're different. We have to let the market discover that. Students and their influencers, like their parents, they have to discover that for themselves. But we can influence that discovery. So to me, branding is really in the discovery business. We help people discover stuff about us we want them to discover.
Mm-hmm.
And from that discovery comes the perception.
Yeah, and it makes sense that every institution should be asking them questions. Who is their customer?
Yep.
Why are we unique? And then that's more of that is kind of an internal focus. But then you've got to look back and says, who does your customer say you are? So
exactly,
that's outside. And
that's the gap. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do students come? Why do faculty want to teach? Now, we're talking about the branding and the reputation, which is the way you project to the outside. But there's another piece with this from an academic perspective, is what is the institution good at? We're going to see some great examples coming up. But again, I'll go back to Carnegie Mellon or an MIT, technology. critical, and MIT and Carnegie Mellon have both leveraged expertise in technology and engineering to become top institutions in the country, in fact, in the world. So
yep, and I can't wait to cuss and discuss about that later.
Yeah, and so it's actually both the internal perspective of what are you good at, and then the external of where you need to position it and what does your market say it needs.
Exactly, and you can't have the external without the internal. Mm-hmm. So you have to be clear first. A lot of people think they are clear, but they are not. Okay, and that comes home to roost in the external. So sometimes when we don't meet expectations, when our brand does not do what we want it to do, sometimes it uncovers a problem internally that didn't get fixed, and therefore it impacts the external. Mm-hmm. External is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, sure does. And so what are some of the key strategies that can get higher ed out of the commodity category?
Well, I think that higher ed has a lot of good news here. And the best news about the higher ed environment is when everything looks the same, it's easier to stand out. You know, I mean, it makes people like my job much easier, you know, because the bar's set a little lower versus some situations where everybody says they're different and there's just so much confusion in the marketplace, you know. So the best strategy that I like to help my clients with is to package your gifts, your strategic advantage to appeal to a specific territory. Okay? Now, brand practitioners like me, we call this owning your corner. So you define your territory, and then you create all the external messaging and experiences and all that around owning that corner. So that owning that corner is really a focal point that aligns all the moving parts that a brand has to implement so that everything's moving in the same direction. That when you have that, when you identify the best message that owns the corner, you know, then you're off to the races.
Mm-hmm. And that makes so much sense. Most folks, when they talk about growing enrollment, they go, hey, just give me the cookbook so that we can do this. You know, tell me what I need to do that's different from other folks. And there's no simple solutions when you've got a market that everybody looks the same. You really have to dig down and do your homework. But, you know.
Absolutely. And that's why you need to bring in some professionals. You know, don't try this at home, because here's the problem. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Okay? Anybody that tells you that's lying. All right? You can talk about principles. I'm going to get on a rant here and I'm going to get off. You can talk about principles. You can talk about ingredients, and that's all fine and good. But how you put those things together is science as well as art. And that is where the nuance comes in, and that is where the talent comes in, and you want to get that right. When it's right, it sings. And what it does is it makes students come to you with a preconceived notion that facilitates enrollment. And so so yeah, absolutely. I feel like a rant's coming on, so I'm going to get off this.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. So what does a good rallying cry look like? What are some of the benchmarks?
You know, a rallying cry is a fabulous combination of clarity and compelling. So it's simple yet memorable. It's something that the stake owners can own and grab onto, okay? So a rallying cry is a focal point that stakeholders can use to compare to others.
Mm-hmm. And so anybody who's studied branding knows that you've got to be clear about your unique contributions, your gifts, your unique selling proposition. You know, What are some of the challenges to be making that clear, getting that clarity that's needed?
It's not looking at the marketplace clearly. Okay, it's creating a false positive in your head and creating from that space. I call this navel gazing. When you're so myopic on the internal that you don't look up, over the desk and say, now what's going on in the marketplace? And when people do look at the marketplace, they really suffer from confirmation bias. They come in with the filter already in place. And that's why I like to tell people you need to bring in an outsider, because an outsider is not going to have that filter. An outsider is going to look at the marketplace much more clearly than y'all can. And with your clarity on the internal and what's going on in the marketplace, you can put those things together and create something really great.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I see is, especially with younger generation, is the need for instant gratification. And what I'm hearing from you is, when it comes to positioning and branding, it's not instant gratification. It requires serious thought, research, and understanding of what's going on to make a positioning statement and then pushing it out there. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely, because it's really hard to undo an experience. Once someone's had an experience of you, that's kind of cemented in their brain. They don't forget it. An experience has a lot of emotion behind it. And so once someone has an experience of you, they think of you in such a way, it's really hard to undo that.
And some great examples, you mentioned one earlier, United Airlines, and
Yep.
dragging a passenger off. But in higher ed, there's other things as well. Virginia Tech had the shooting on campus years ago. University of Texas at Austin, the same thing. And so, one of the faux pas that I think UT Austin did was the Texas legislature passed the carry guns on campus law, and it was signed into law on the same day, the anniversary of the shooting at UT Austin. Now, how does that
you bring up a great point there. Yeah.
Yeah, that raises this back into people's mind, instead of saying, oh, UT Austin, incredible research facility. They go, no, guns, you need to have guns on campus to protect yourself. Wrong messaging.
Exactly. And I think that, to your point, that goes to show you the power of our response. Higher ed, just like any other workplace, any other environment, sometimes we can't control everything that happens. Stuff happens. It's our response to that that sets the brand. Okay? And we are when those things happen, we are under a microscope, especially with social media. Social media takes a moment in time and expands it out. So it's like looking under a microscope and seeing these small things. And I'm not saying the shootings are small things. I'm just using this as an analogy. But you see something out of context and it blows up. So use the shooting as an example. This was an incident that was horrific, but it doesn't happen every day. But people get the impression now, because of the state legislature, hey, there's a bunch of gun toters over there. Either you're a gun guy or a gun person, or you're not. And if you're not going to be safe there. That's the message they just sent out.
Yeah. And so that's great stuff. Let's keep going.
Okay.
A couple of mistakes in implementing good positioning. I know we have talked about this a lot, but you said there's really two traps that institutions fall into.
Absolutely. And this is what happens when you create in a vacuum. This is the default trap that a lot of higher eds fall into. One is what I call talented but nondescript. And this is where students and parents and the community think, hey, this is a good school. We just don't know what to do with them. I mean, it's a good school. Yeah, we don't have any complaints. That allows a higher ed institution who is differentiated to overshadow you if you're in that trap. The second trap is what I call old wine in a new bottle. This is when you say that you're this and that, which is what everybody else says. You're just telling a different story. Now, this is what happens when an institution will hire a marketing agency or a PR firm that doesn't have a strong grasp on the marketplace. What will happen, and sometimes it even happens internally, they'll create a great story, they'll create great messaging, but if there's not enough strategy behind that messaging, you're just using different words to say the same thing. And let me tell you, students and their stakeholders, their influencers, they're pretty savvy. They can see right through that stuff now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about who the customer is for higher ed. You know, higher ed thinks itself as an island, but really, who is their actual customer? You've mentioned a couple of them. You've mentioned students. You've mentioned parents. And yes, absolutely, they're part of being the customer. But what we like to think is that higher ed is in part of the talent supply chain. And with all the focus on value, students not perceiving the value of higher ed, there have been a few studies that have come out recently that have talked about the two biggest reasons why students go back to school in what's called the post-traditionals is one, and this makes up 70% of all students are post-traditionals. That's 13 million students currently.
Wow.
Yeah, that's huge. It's financial change or work-related. So they're going back to school for specific things. So if you take a look at this, you've got, high school students come out of there with, what do they want to focus on for their career, and then their extracurricular activities. Those get them into a college. They have a major, internships, and again, extracurricular activities. Their first job, industry and skills, is college training students to get that first job. We kind of liken this to a manufacturing plant, to where the student really is the raw material that's being converted in multiple ways into a product that goes out the door and is sold to the people who might hire them.
And to that point, Drumm, I think you have an excellent point in changing expectations. When people are post-traditional, they may have different expectations than someone coming right out of high school.
Exactly. And so with that same thing, you're starting to see micro-credentials growing, certification growing. And I think this is going to be one of the next big things in higher ed is how do you certify? I know one institution that is aligned with EC Council, if you take one of the courses there, you will automatically get one of their certifications. Now, EC Council is huge in the cybersecurity area. So this is a way of tying college credits to a certification which you can directly market for jobs.
Exactly, and look at that from a branding perspective. The higher ed is connecting with a brand that will meet the expectations of their students.
Exactly. And so with that, with the programs, you've got certain programs that are known for things. Cornell is hospitality management. University of Nevada, Las Vegas, gaming, and we've got a number of others that we'll look at today. It starts with that future environmental scanning, i.e. where are the jobs going to be, What is the expertise that your faculty have? What are they known for? And how do you reconcile both of those things? What programs do you need to add? What do you need to retire? And what new faculty hire? How do you repurpose others or lay them off, unfortunately? So it really comes down,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, it comes down to where you're going, which, one of my
Exactly.
favorite things with Lewis Carroll. So let's get into some specifics here. Our first institution we're going to look at is Berkeley.
Yep.
So Berkeley is a great example, known for their academic intellectual debates. And, some of them not quite so academic, i.e. the Vietnam War, recent protests about Trump's immigration ban. But they've got an international focus, great debates. What can we learn from them?
Well, I think that they are a great example of use of story and rules of engagement. This really sets the stage for expectations. Berkeley positions by mindset here. So the key message that everything is aligned around, when you stop and think about it, is if you believe this, then we are for you. So when you position by mindset, this creates a really strong focal point. So it also creates a point of comparison between them and other schools. So when you position by mindset, this is a great way to align your experience, your stories, also programs, everything, because now you have, here's the rules of engagement, here's the mindset that we're attracting. That's really owning their corner from a brain share standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And you can see on their website here, by the numbers, Berkeley has more Nobel Prize winners than any other institution, under their history, the free speech movement, wetsuits, some of the things that they've done. They
all
tout
speaks
that
to
very
mindset,
highly.
doesn't it? Yeah, all speaks to mindset.
Absolutely. So our, here is more traditions, talking about traditions. This is
See, mindset. So
yeah.
this is like, here's your experience based upon mindset. This is what I love about this example is the alignment of it. Everything is aligned toward mindset.
Yeah. And so Harvard, gold standard. What are they doing right, and how can we apply this to our institution?
Well, what I love about Harvard is it uses exclusivity really well. Okay, so this is a great move for institutions with a lot of history. They are deploying their history. Now, overall, just so you know, overall, this is harder to implement. So that's why they combine that with a focus on creating leaders. Now note, they don't just rest on their history. They're not just saying, hey, come to us because we're exclusive. They combine exclusivity with the focal point. They focus on the role rather than the mindset like Berkeley does. So they focus on creating leaders. So this is a great balance between a broad vision, hey, we're exclusive, yet they're also specific enough to define their space. They want to own the leadership corner. We create world leaders. We create business leaders. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting about me is Harvard, if you look closely in the logo, Veritas.
Uh-huh.
They think they speak the truth above all else. It's a thought leadership as well as creating leaders.
Mm-hmm. And they're using their history to demonstrate that. Absolutely.
Right. Now, Carnegie Mellon is one of my favorites. And the reason I like Carnegie Mellon is years ago, it was a relatively nondescript university in Pittsburgh. It decided to position itself with respect to information technology and now AI. And they are known throughout the tech world is one of the top places to go for IT. So tell us, what are the key learnings with this one?
Okay, I love Carnegie Mellon for this reason. Look, they are a great example of strategic storytelling. I mean, these are fabulous people. Now look at the top poker pro example here. Now they've got two components. Let's just break this down. First, poker is hot right now. Okay, so this sounds relevant. They have taken, so the topic of their story drives relevance. What they're basically saying is, hey, we're cool. Okay, we're taking IT and we're making it cool. All right, now AI is hot too. Okay, but this story is a blend of an on-the-ground application that still raises the ambition of the students. So this is a great example of using the branding tools of the trade. Everyone says, hey, tell stories. But there's a strategy behind that. And part of the strategy is really deciding what story to tell. What are you really appealing to when you tell a certain story? And so their topic is really amazing because what they're doing, they're telegraphing, hey, geek world, you're going to do some cool stuff here. And that's exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, great, thanks. Now, MIT, we've got a couple more examples here, and then we'll wrap up. MIT, it's another great example, an engineering college who took that expertise and expanded it out. What's the story behind the tactics and how can we apply that at our institution?
They are a great example of strategic territory. Now, you've allowed me to rant a little bit about owning the corner. MIT is fabulous with this because they don't only define their topic, which is science and technology. See, a lot of people do that, right? But look what they combine that with, discovery. Now, discovery is a very emotional concept. So don't underestimate this last part. Don't underestimate the discovery part. It's at the heart. It's the heart of the positioning. So what I love about MIT is the blend of the head, because they say, hey, here's our corner, science and tech, but they also use the heart of discovery. This allows the marketplace to dream a little. This is going to be for the students who have talent and they want to create something. They want to make their mark. They want to discover something. MIT is perfect for them.
Yeah, it is. Now, we've talked about some really big schools and big names out there. We're going to go to one local here in California, Cal State San Marcos. Mm-hmm. And Cal State now for 20 to 25 years, somewhere in there, and their president, Karen Haynes, has done a fabulous job. She's been here around 15 years, lends itself to exactly what the school has become known for. It has somewhere between 40 and 50% of its attendees as first-generation college attendees. And you can clearly see that in their vision here, this celebrate, capitalize on diversity.
Yep.
They, public trust, alignment with regional needs, sustained enrichment of intellectual, civic, economic, and cultural life, diverse backgrounds, affordable education here, and then in their values, inclusiveness, individual cultural diversity, multiple perspectives. I just love what this university does. In fact, I get involved with them. I serve as a mentor to their MBA students. I feel so strongly about it. So tell me a little bit about what they're doing a great job at and what we can learn.
Well, they're the masters of targeting. Okay, so they've done a great job in getting into the minds and the hearts of their best target market, which are this first generation. So what they do is they say, you will be heard, you will be appreciated. All those things come together. But let's look at what they do by focusing on the environment, okay? Their key message is, this will be your experience while you're here. So they are focusing on, from a first-timer, they're focusing on, this is what's going to happen. Here's this magical place. You're going to be okay. Now, this really applies to the biggest fear of first-generation college students, is that they will fail, that the environment will be a hostile environment to them. They're showing a welcoming environment. Take a look at this. They also do one of my favorite tactics in branding, and that's juxtaposition. All right? They combine the academic strengths of a large university with the personal interaction characteristic of smaller institutions. Now, basically what they're saying here is, hey, you're going to have the best of both worlds. You get your cake and eat it too. All right? We're not going to coddle you. We're going to be rigorous, but you're also going to get plenty of personal attention, which is what these particular folks really need. So juxtaposition, using that range, is very effective brand tactic. It gets attention, and it also is the best of both worlds. So we can definitely take a page from that playbook.
Yeah. And if you take a look at the photos that they have on the website, I know Cal State San Marcos is considered to be a commuter campus. They have very few on-campus dorms. Most people come from the local area and commute to campus. It's perfect for that post-traditional student.
Absolutely. So they're looking at the future. Yes, absolutely. Yep. And again, it goes back to alignment. Even the selection of photos, everything is done with care. It's done with focus. All the ducks are lined up. What a concept.
Yeah, they've done a fabulous job. So we've got just about 7 minutes left. I think it's time for a wrap-up. So let's put it all together. So we've talked primarily today over this area, this positioning, rallying cry, branding, things like that. But we know that we can't do these things in a vacuum. That's why you have to think holistically to create the best positioning, looking both at the current and the future environment, looking at your skills, the assessment of what you have. Everything has to be packaged properly to stand out in that competitive market where your value is not assumed. And the alignment that you've talked so passionately about, Vickie, it makes sure that the strategies, the structures, the processes, they all work in harmony. It's critical for organizations to realize that ideal future vision. So just to kind of wrap up, my buddy Albert, we've got serious problems. It reminds me of, what was that, 76 trombones? We got serious trouble, folk, right here in River City. Well, in higher ed, we've got some challenges as well. We can't solve the problems by the same level of thinking that created them. So we've got to take a step back and look at organizations, institutions holistically, starting with the future environmental scanning, looking at the positioning, and looking at the skills. So Vickie, we thank you so much for joining us. We do have that gift for the people who were willing to stick around to the end. And I'm going to draw a name. Vickie, give me a number between 1 and 45, please. 48. Very good. And that corresponds to Robert Humphreys. So, Robert, we thank you for sticking around. You will be our thing. I'm going to stop